You come to the President of the United States to plead for a bloodsucker.
Mr. President, Congress has voted to retain the National Bank.
And I have vetoed that bill.
But only Congress has the authority to charter a bank for government deposits.
And I have the authority to veto it. And if they move forward again, I'll veto it again. I'm removing all government deposits and putting them in the local banks.
Well, there'll be a panic.
A bank monopoly will not threaten this government devil take it. Not while I'm president. This country belongs to the people. It's not the toy of some Philadelphia millionaire. Here, take your petitions and get out. Get out! Scared the hell out of him, didn't I?
I'll smash the bank.
What's up, and welcome to this exciting edition of Simply Bitcoin. I am your host, Rustin Watt. Today, we've got a little history lesson on one of the most OG Bitcoiners that ever lived, 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. After witnessing the recent and growing spread of the vicious virus of tyranny on a global scale, it's almost hard to remember it didn't used to be like this. At one time, strong men were leaders who stood on principle and did what they thought would preserve the integrity and liberty of the people they represented. We've come a long way since the based Andrew Jackson told the central bank in TLDR format to go fuck themselves. This from Rogue Analyst, a classic political cartoon. Quote from the 7th president himself: "You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the grace of the eternal God, I will rout you out. We need a president who will take on the Federal Reserve like Andrew Jackson did, the second bank of the United States." Can you even imagine a modern president taking on the Fed? In the early 19th century, the Bank of the United States became the nation's first central bank. Andrew Jackson promised to diminish the Bank of the United States and their control over the economy in 1829. Jackson called the bank a hydra-headed monster that eroded American moral standards, contaminated political leaders, threatened our freedom, bought dozens of congressmen, and tried to destroy our democracy. Let's take a look at this nice thread from Miles Suter. Peter Thiel, tell me something that's true but nobody agrees with. Me, Andrew Jackson was the greatest president, and his killing of the second bank of the U.S. is intentionally buried in history textbooks. The history of the United States is the history of its monetary policy. There is a reason Old Hickory is singularly slandered by the mainstream. He was fiat woke. Your education is the product of a government monopoly, and the takeaways you are left with, a matter of bureaucratic policy. There is so much out there to discover if you seek to break your conditioning. Andrew Jackson fought against the two-tiered justice system, the revolving door between government and industry, and the evolving corptocracy that is so pronounced today. Oh, and he killed the second iteration of America's unconstitutional private central bank. Bitcoiners, free market, and Austrian economists share this same view of the Fed and centralized institutions today. In the election year of 1832, the bank president, working with Congressman Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, requested an extension on the 20-year charter. They believed that Jackson wouldn't jeopardize his re-election by utilizing the presidential veto if Congress approved it. Well, they really screwed the pooch on that one. The banking establishment learned the hard way. Don't underestimate Old Hickory. Jackson laid it down forcefully and poetically in his veto of the bank's charter for the following reasons. It was a financially dominant entity that was dangerously centralized. It rendered the economy vulnerable to foreign and special interests. It had too much power over federal lawmakers. It favored the North, where most financial centers were situated, over the South and West. It possessed an unconstitutional monopoly on finance that only helped the rich get richer at the expense of the plebs. And all of these criticisms still apply to the Federal Reserve System of today. Jackson's detractors believed that the veto would end Jackson's political career, but once again, their predictions were incorrect, since most voters supported him, and he was re-elected with little difficulty. Emboldened by his triumph, Jackson sent orders to the Treasury to withdraw government monies from the bank. As a result, the bank failed. Without the cash required to give out favors, within a few short years, the bank succumbed to its inability to obtain funds from the federal government. Through the 1840s and 1850s, President Andrew Jackson's triumph over the Bank of the United States decentralized the economy, which resulted in increased economic prosperity and individual freedom. And here we are from the relevant Peter Schiff. And again, one of Andrew Jackson's most famous quotes: "If the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution by morning." Pretty sure he would have told you to buy Bitcoin too. I love Old Hickory's middle finger to the central bank. Now, how would the Bitcoin standard return America to its roots? Jackson adhered to the more Jeffersonian, rigorous understanding of the Constitution. The power to establish a bank was not delegated to Congress by the Constitution. However, the idea that Congress had the authority to establish a bank was the impetus behind Alexander Hamilton's formulation of the implied powers doctrine. A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President. According to this theory, Congress possessed the authority to do anything necessary and proper, Article 1, Section 8, to fulfill its fiscal responsibilities. Jackson disagreed with this viewpoint and believed that Congress did not possess a specific power if the Constitution did not expressly grant that authority to it clearly and unequivocally. The fact that the National Bank did not have to answer to anybody else in government breaches the system of checks and balances. In addition, it had a dominant position in the financial sector. It was a very interesting statement that the central bank relinquishes national sovereignty to foreign control. He also pointed out that more than a quarter of the national bank owners were from other countries. He argued that it discriminates against the entirety of the American population and disregards their viewpoints. In practice, this goes against a government based on equality, honesty, and justice because only a select few individuals from privileged groups in foreign countries own the shares of the bank. Most of the bank's control was held by investors from other countries and the Bank of England. By demanding interest payments from customers who use their paper American money, these outside investors made a significant profit from the national bank. By increasing the money supply and imposing interest fees on its use, the U.S. bank quickly put the American people in a position of growing debt. The obligation to repay this debt fell squarely on the shoulders of the American people. The national bank was a dishonest organization that served the interests of foreign investors while placing the financial burden of debt on the American people. Jackson could see the fundamental abuse of power that the U.S. bank was committing. In the note that accompanied his veto, he outlined several apparent reasons why the national bank should not be rechartered. Jackson presented evidence that the bank violated the Constitution, served as a monopoly for the wealthy, and left the nation vulnerable to the influence of foreign interest. Here's an excerpt from Jackson on the central bank being under foreign interest. Quote, "Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence, it would be more formidable and dangerous than the naval and military power of the enemy." Jackson's veto letter appealed to commoners and it attacked the elite. In a statement explaining his veto, Jackson directed most of his comments toward average Americans while targeting the elites. Jackson issued a stern warning that the concepts of the measure ran counter to the values of Republican equality and that the bill violated these beliefs. He was under the impression that the bank was a shady establishment that catered to the well-to-do and gave people with riches an advantage in the political sphere. Jackson advocated for equitable access to opportunities and contended that the bank fostered special privilege, monopoly for the wealthy, and a perilously high degree of inequality. He also observed that the bulk of the shareholders comprised a select group of wealthy upper-class individuals. He felt sorry for the maltreated farmers, mechanics, laborers, and stood in solidarity with them. Jackson's history had a factor in his decision to veto the bill. Because he spent his childhood in the rural areas of Tennessee under the care of his aunt, he was familiar with working-class lifestyle. His life experience shaped his opinion that the central bank was a monopoly for the wealthy, and as a result, he exercised his veto power against the measure. Andrew Jackson's own words on the injustice of the national bank and the Cantillon benefits. Their power would be great whenever they might choose to exert it, but if this monopoly were regularly renewed every 15 or 20 years on terms proposed by themselves, they might seldom in peace put forth their strength to influence elections or control the affairs of the nation. Pretty sure based Old Hickory was a Bitcoiner. Jackson lived a gigantic life, but like many plebs, he was an underdog that had to overcome adversity, and he attacked life with tenacity. Jackson's father died before he was born in 1767, but he held a desire to fight tyranny at a young age growing up in Revolutionary-era South Carolina. He joined the cause at the age of 13 with his brothers. His older brother died in 1779 following the Battle of Stono Ferry. Jackson and his brother were POWs 2 years later, and while captive, a British soldier slashed young Jackson with his sword after he refused to spit shine a Tory soldier's boots. Jackson and his brother contracted smallpox while in custody before they were free via a prisoner exchange. Not long after, Jackson's brother Robert died died from the disease. The to-be president recovered, but his mother died after coming down with an illness tending to the wounded and sick soldiers. Jackson was an orphan at the age of 14. Despite all this, the man became a mostly self-taught attorney, judge, war hero, and president. Like the plebs, he never backed down to a duel, stood on his principles, he fought the media of the time, the state, and most importantly, the central bank. Despite constant attacks, he was adored by the people and threw arguably the biggest rager in United States history at his first inauguration. Everyone from every walk of life came to the White House to celebrate his election. That they had to renovate the White House after, it was like The Hangover, but in 1829. Bitcoiners like Jackson stand against the centralized, unelected monopoly that is the central bank. Like Jackson, Bitcoiners understand how the central banking cabal has foreign interests and entanglements, along with the Cantillon effect. Like Jackson, Bitcoiners have voiced how powerful and monolithic the Fed and state have become. It's insane the amount of foresight and understanding Jefferson, Jackson, and other founding fathers had in what this institution would become. Jackson grew up in the middle of the Revolutionary era in which the war began over taxation without representation to the crown. This included 3% increases in taxes. Jackson would lose his shit if he saw today a nation $30 trillion in debt with 18% real inflation, at least a 30% plus income tax, and now a new 87,000 IRS agents paid for by the taxpayer. Jackson would call out and rebel against Clown World with every ounce of his being. We have to return to our roots of rugged individualists that desire to determine our destiny and the base beliefs in self-reliance, responsibility, individual liberty, and sound money. As the hardest money ever created or discovered, Bitcoin is the life raft available to anyone willing to jump aboard. When enough people wake up, as they did in 1832, to not only support but re-elect a leader that stood up to shut down the central bank, the Bitcoin standard will be in full effect. You know, I think Andrew Jackson would be on a beach in El Zonte if he were here today, stringing words together to fuel the fires of liberty while battling statist cooks with the plebs. That'll bring us to a wrap. Thanks to everyone again. Share us, give us a pump, and tune in to Simply Bitcoin Live at 12:15 Monday through Friday. And don't forget to join the conversation with the after show straight from Twitter Spaces. I hope you enjoyed your Simply Bitcoin history lesson. Until next time, peace.